Glide is an amazing no-code application builder that gives you an easy way to build beautiful applications for mobile and web. Glide deploys as a progressive web application, or PWA. Your app isn't actually listed on the App Store or Play Store, but it can easily be shared via a link or an invite and can be downloaded to your mobile device. This lets you take advantage of triggering calls, text messages, or even using a camera for QR or barcode scanning. Glide got its start as a front-end builder using Google Sheets as a back-end. Now you can connect to a variety of different data sources, perfect for larger companies who are already managing customer data in their own databases. But they also provide their own internal Glide tables, so you don't have to rely on external data sources like Google Sheets or Airtable. In fact, if your business is scaling and you're running into database limits in other no-code applications, Glide's Big Tables lets you use up to 10 million rows. In addition to managing your data and building beautiful layouts, Glide has a powerful set of automation actions, letting you integrate with many popular applications, interact with your data, utilize AI features, and more. Hi, I'm Dan Lehman from automationhelpers.com, and we help companies like yours build portals, apps, and integrate to your business applications. If you haven't used Glide before, you can get started for free using the affiliate link in the description below. Now, these videos can be a little bit longer in nature, so we've included some timestamps if you want to click down below on the sections that are most relevant to you. Before we get into the application itself, let's talk through Glide's pricing model. They actually recently made some changes in January of 2024, so it's important to see how they're positioned and what exactly you're paying for before you get too deep into the process. So I'm taking a look at Glide's pricing page, and one of the things that I want to point out so it doesn't get confusing here is that most of the time when you look at a pricing page, you see maybe a free option on one side, and on the other side, you've got enterprise, contact sales, and then you've got a few different pricing options in between, but they're all linear. You go from free and then you go to really expensive. This is a little bit different. They have a free plan, they've got this business plan, but in between, their maker plan is actually very, very different from their team and business plan. It's not pay a little bit more for maker and then switch over to team or business. Maker is really geared at a different kind of audience. If we scroll down, one of the first things to point out is how their pricing works. It's typically based on two main criteria: the number of users that you have that are interacting with your applications, as well as the updates that you're making. And so this is both the database updates to the backend, as well as using some of their integration actions. Now, it's important to understand that Glide is primarily geared at building internal applications for businesses. And this can catch people off guard a little bit sometimes because Glide is really great at building apps. And so a lot of people are like, hey, I want to build my next MVP. I've got this consumer-driven app that I want people to have access to. Well, Glide isn't primarily geared at that. In the past, there were a lot of people who used it that way, but with their pricing updates, I'd say that not as many people are going to gravitate towards that direction. But this is what this maker plan is all about. Before we get too deep into the maker plan, let's take a look at what free has to offer. So on the free plan, you're only using Glide tables as a data source. And this is really big here because Glide tables is now kind of the primary back end for Glide. If you're a bigger company, yeah, you can connect to all these different databases up here, but they're trying to steer people on the lower plans to the Glide tables direction. And in doing so, they're actually incentivizing it. So you're not going to get charged for updates to anything to do with Glide tables, which means on the free plan, we're not worried about updates because we're only using Glide tables. Glide tables doesn't charge you for the updates. Therefore, on the free plan, you just don't have to worry about it. But what that also means is that you're only using Glide tables. You're not integrating to Google Sheets or Airtable or any other data sources. And the cool piece is that you can build a full-fledged app on this plan, but you're only making that one published app. You're only giving that access to 10 people who are using it. And these 10 people are personal users. So personal users, you can see the description here, are users who can sign into Glide using a consumer email domain, such as Gmail, or they also count education domains as being part of this personal one. So you can't be a company, we're automation helpers. If I have my team from automation helpers, they can't access it by signing in with their automation helpers email. They can all go use their personal Gmail addresses and sign up for it. But you can see that this plan is really meant for testing and maybe for some small use cases as you're first checking out Glide. So the maker plan is going to be geared if maybe you're building an app for your club at school or you're doing a community project and you only get access to these personal users. Now you get unlimited personal users, which is pretty nice here. But again, they can only sign in using those personal or education email addresses to be able to access this information. It's also restricted to a single published app. So you're not building multiple applications on this plan. You can't be an agency and you're spinning up lots of different individual apps. Instead, it's one app, make it available for personal users, and then we've got a relatively small number of updates here. So in our pricing calculator, we can click on Maker and you can see we're restricted. It's unlimited, but we can't change this number and it's only personal users. We can't add on business users or just standard users to this. And then updates, we only get these 500 and you're paying 2 cents per update. So suddenly, if you're talking about, hey, great, this took off and I've got 10,000 users and up using this, you're going to be consuming a lot of different updates here, especially if you're using Google Sheets to power it as opposed to Glide tables. Then you can see how quickly this scales. So a lot of users means a lot of different updates, which is going to push that pricing up pretty quickly. So this is not to say you shouldn't use the Maker plan. The Maker plan still fits great with a lot of people, but if you're planning on building a business around a subscription app for consumers, I'd say there's probably other tools that you want to take a look at. Next up, we have our team and our business, and we can kind of talk about these together. Obviously, there's a change in pricing here that's fairly significant. Business, you can see we have a number of different databases. This is going to be, hey, you've got a Postgres database, or you want to use Glide Big Tables, which gives you up to 10 million rows here. So this is really going to be, you have a really high scalable app that you need to push out to your users. You need some of those additional data sources. Both of them have different integrations that they include on those plans. So you'll want to take a look at the integrations depending on what you're using. But again, most of the apps here are much more enterprise focused. You're doing things like data enrichment and handling contracts and integrating to service ticketing desks like Zendesk. So there's lots of different things here, but really you're getting a lot of the same functionality. It's more just the enhanced enterprise features at that business level. So both of these are going to start at 20 users. You are going to get a different number of updates bundled in, starting at 5,000 or starting at 10,000. And editors are going to be the people on your team who are actually building those applications with you. So you can have 5 of those people on the team and 10 of them on the business. These team and business plans are really geared at building those internal tools. And what I love is on team and business, not to have to worry about the number of apps that you're building. Because once you adopt this for your business, you're going to want to build all sorts of different applications. You're going to want to standardize on Glide apps, not having to worry about, hey, can we squeeze this all into one application so we don't have to pay extra is great not to have to worry about that. Taking a look at some of the key features, here we get the Glide Basic API. This is if we want to write data into Glide. We're updating what we have inside of Glide tables. Our call API is going to be a little bit different, where we're actually making a call externally to fetch data and then pull it in. So that's going to be a little bit more akin to if you were using something like Make or Zapier, but you could cut out that middleman and instead make those calls yourself. Now, the big differentiator on pricing, aside from the core pricing between team and business, look, if we hover here, we've got $4 per monthly active user versus $8 per monthly active user. So again, we've got these sliders here where we can take a look at different examples, but you're going to be paying double per user if you're on that business plan. That's our high-level overview of pricing. Let's get into the application itself. When you get logged into Glide, this is the first page that you'll see, and this is kind of our management area where we can have different folders, create our apps from here. Down in the lower left-hand corner, this is where we can manage our members of our team who can actually build the apps with us. And then we can keep track of things like our usage of how many updates we're consuming. But let's go ahead and build our first app here. We'll click on New App. And I'm just going to show you for a moment where we can build with Airtable if you want to see what it's like to connect to a different data source. Most of this video, we're actually going to focus on Glide tables because I think there's a lot of advantages here. But just to get started, let's choose a different data source like Airtable. And from here, you'll authenticate, and then you can choose from your different bases that you have. So I'm going to use a sales CRM example that I've created in the past. The reason I want to show connecting to a different data source is just to show you what the data is like over here. So this is going to all display as a grid or like a spreadsheet. And this is great because I think it makes it really easy to manage and control your data. Now, I just want to differentiate this for a second compared to if you're used to using a tool like Airtable, because in Airtable, you'd presumably share and give access so that people could see this grid and your users could actually interact with this data. You'd think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to give access to this grid view. That's not really what this is for. This is more on the back end side. So as you're building your app, you can see the data that lives in the database, and you can interact with it, right? You can click into different cells here and make changes and updates to it. And you can add your own columns, and we'll talk about some of the different column types here. But this is really just a back end piece of this, whereas for Airtable, they really make the back end into the front end. So that's one differentiator there. Now, this data itself, it's important to understand that if you're using an outside data source, the Glide is automatically keeping this in sync. So when you build your Glide layouts, it's interacting with the data that's here on the screen, but this is what's being kept in sync with your data source. So let's take a look at Michelle Torres right here. She is listed as a VIP. You can see inside of Airtable, she's listed, we've got a star, it's a checkbox or a Boolean here. So let's uncheck this for her. She's no longer a VIP. And then when we go back into Airtable, we can see it just ran in the background. It's actually updating that record for us. So if we are deleting records, we're updating records, we're creating new records, you can see we've got this little icon that represents that this is kept in sync with its source database. And I'm showing this example with Airtable, but this works with any of the different databases. So if you're using Postgres or something else, this is going to be kept in sync at all times. So to get a better understanding of the components with Glide, I'm actually going to create this app from a template. And this, I think, is a great way to get started because you can see some really good designs and how they get started. And then later on, you can certainly build your own, or you can take the ones that are existing and tweak them as well. So let's go ahead and actually visit the template store so you can see there's different options. Many are free, many are paid. You can see what's out there and choose ones that are a good start for you. And for this video, we're going to choose a company CRM. So you can search for CRM. We can preview this as well. So we can click and open this up and interact with it, see what it looks like. And let's go ahead and copy this in Glide so we can work on our own application ourselves. Now let's talk about the different main areas of the navigation inside of Glide. So we showed you in the Airtable example a little bit about the data here. Again, this is the data that we're interacting with on the back end. Over on the left-hand side, we can see the different tables that we have. We can create new tables. So I've got contacts, contracts, the companies that we're interacting with. We have a users table here, and these are going to be the people who can actually log into our application and interact with the data and create their own records. And then we also have a helper table, and this is pretty common in Glide where we want to make a choice list of something and we're going to choose from a given data set. So we don't always have to have these. This isn't really core to the business functionality here today, but oftentimes you'll see this as you're building out apps. Next up, we have our layout. And you can see that we're actually interacting with the layout on the screen. So this isn't just kind of a read-only version of this. You could say, hey, I want to create a new contact, and it actually pulls up the screens, or we could dig into the contact information for someone here. So what I really like is just how simple this is to be able to interact with what you're creating as we're building it. It's not like an IDE with code where we're just coding it, and then we have to build the application, and then we can interact with it. You're really seeing all of the changes that you're doing in real time as you're actually building it in the layout. Now, over on the left-hand side, we've got our navigation, and this is representing what we see down on the lower part of our app here. We've got our contacts, companies, contracts, and users. You can see that aligns with the navigation up there. We also have a side menu that can slide out. You can see we've got this hamburger menu, and we could put some of our pages in there. So maybe we want to click and drag these contracts and put that under our menu as an option. So now we only have our 3 buttons down here to interact with our core data, but we could expand this and we could click on our contracts. As we're building our application, we can see it both presented on mobile as well as if we're doing a desktop preview of this. You're really only building this once and it's being manifested, it's being presented both for mobile and desktop. So you don't have to create 2 different versions of your application. Glide is going to handle this automatically for you. And the way it's deployed as a PWA anyways, it's not like we're building it for a native mobile application and shipping that out the door. I think this is one of the reasons that people love Glide so much is it's just easy to build. And the other part about this is that it's so aesthetically pleasing right out the door, both in what we're building here, but if you just start from scratch, it looks really good. They are maintaining their design of these components all the time. So in Glide, yes, you can add custom CSS and things if you want, but you're going to be using modern design principles that you don't really have to worry about. I'm not really a designer at heart. We have designers on our team, but for me, I want to be able to get up and running quickly and make something that looks good without having to worry about pixel perfect design. I just want it to work for me. Now, besides our core navigation, you can see we also have this area for components. These are going to be the different building blocks that we have to make our app display the way we want it to. In this case, when I'm looking at this collection of contacts, there's only one component, this collection itself. And there's some different settings. Do we want to display the search? Do we want to have certain buttons associated with it? But we're really just showing a list or a collection of these things. But now look, if I click into one of these contacts, this changes. The components I'm displaying, now there's several more of them. A container is just a grouping mechanism for how we can take different data and display it together on a screen. We've got a title area here, which contains some information about her name and the company that she's working at and an image. And then down here, we've got information about her company. And you can see that we can hover over any of these areas. Now, one of the things that I'd say is some of you might be coming from more no code, something like Airtable, and others of you are coming from more low code or code. And I know those of you who are coming from other no-code applications, sometimes seeing all these components can feel a little bit intimidating because you're like, wait, I have to worry about every single thing on the screen. But really, it's very easy to get started. If you take a look at these components, this slides out and you can just click and drag on what you want and pull it on here. There's not too many nested things. So yes, we do have containers to group things together, but we're not getting down to a field and then this pixel on the field, and then how do we want to change every bit of padding with that that's associated. Again, this is just going to look good out of the box. So being able to take new elements, let's say we want to have some new piece of text here and just click and drag it on, and there it is. So it's very easy to interact with this application as you're building it. Now, if you're like me, you probably find yourself switching back and forth a lot between the data and the layout, and the data and the layout. And this can be a little bit annoying of an experience, which is why Glide built this amazing feature to be able to have your data preview over here. And it's actually not just like read only or something like that. Instead, you can actually interact with the data. So if I want to change a value here, her name is Adia instead of Ada, you can see that that just updates it in real time. This is now updated in the database itself in Glide tables, and we can see it now manifested in the front end. The other cool thing is this shows the data in the context of what you're interacting with. So we have one contact row or record here. We're interacting with it, so we can see that one row of our table here. If we go back to our collection of contacts, look how this changes. Now we can see all of our contacts that are displaying here. So this is really nice to be able to have this on. You can see it does clutter up the interface a little bit, so oftentimes we can collapse this. But if you find yourself needing to go back and forth a lot between what you're building on the data side and then the layout, this is nice to be able to expand that area. Now, the last navigation piece we need to talk about is the different properties. And there's a lot of things that we can do as we're interacting with the different components we have. So here we have a collection of these contacts. When I click on that component, you can see that my options, my settings, all of those change to reflect what it is that I'm working on. So here we could choose from different ways of presenting this on the screen. So I could have a collection that's displaying as a card. I could have a grid, which is a slight change here. We've got a list, a table. We could have checklists. Again, this probably doesn't make sense for our contacts, but think about tasks that you might have in a collection. And again, good for tasks, you might have a calendar. We could display meetings that we have. As we talk to these contacts, we book meetings with them. We want to display it on a calendar. Or we have tasks and we want to display this on a Kanban. A data grid, which people can interact with in this grid view that feels much more like the tables that we have on the back end. So you can see we have a lot of options of how this is presented in something like a collection. And then any of these components that we add are going to have their own display options as well. So you have a lot of configurable options and settings that you can choose from. But on the other hand, if you just want to get things up and running quickly and you don't care about all of that, it looks great to begin with. You don't have to make a lot of changes. So let's say we just want to change something simple. We've got her name and we've got the company here. You can see we've got our items data that's displaying, and we could change our meta to display some other data here. Maybe we want it to have their job title that's listed here. So we've got sales, accountant, we've got some additional information there. We can do these in different combinations, pulling from the data that we have. And you can see that we have actions down here at the bottom. Do we want people to add and edit and delete the different records that we have? So we can edit this and we could see the different actions up at the top. What's great about this is that it's very easy to add different rules, different business logic around how this is handled. So you could say, hey, yeah, I want people to create a new contact record. If we do that, look, I can just toggle this on or off. Do we want people to add new contact information? And we could say, well, I only want certain people to be able to add contacts. Well, great. That's where we could add a condition. You'll notice this pops up. Visibility is not a security feature. We'll talk about that in a moment, especially when it comes to having ownership of records. I'm going to turn that off for now. And here's where we could say, okay, based on information from the records themselves, we could have conditionality based on the data that we have in the application, or we could do based on the user profile. Now, right now in the user profile, I don't have something really for filtering. So I'm going to go back into my data and let's look at this users table here for a second. We're going to add a new column here and we'll just keep this as text, but we're going to have this be our role. And so for that role, let's say we want to have maybe an administrator, and then we have a manager, and then we've got just some sales reps. Now we can do a few different things with our user roles, but for right now, we're just going to have this govern what kinds of actions that we can take. So if we look at our actions, we can say, okay, well, we allow users to add items. Maybe we're going to let people delete those contacts, but we're only going to let them delete if their user profile, if their role, and we're going to say if that matches to say if they are an admin. So now if they're an admin, they're going to get the ability to delete one of those records. So if you remember when we set this up in our data and we were looking at our users, we made Alma an admin of the system and Elise is a manager. So Hugo is a sales rep. If we go back to my layout here and we say, hey, you know what? This is where we can drop down and view this as a user. So it's going to actually take into context who is logged into the application. We're impersonating this user. So for Hugo in this case, and now we want to try to delete this record, we can't. And why is that? Well, that's because when we gave the options on those actions, we were saying we only make this action visible. We only give the option to delete records if you match this criteria. Now, what I really like about Glide is they made these options easy. I mean, these are the most common things that we do with any database. We have CRUD operations. We can create, read, update, and delete. And so they make these actions front and center. But we could also do more advanced things. So right here, we don't have to think about, well, what are we hooking this up to? If we have a button to create a record, what does that look like? What icon are we using? What does it open? But if you want to get really granular, you can. So we could enable advanced actions here. And this is where we could have different options to say what happens when we actually click on that item on the screen. We could have these collection item actions, and we could add our own custom actions. So we could give it our own title. And we've got many of these kind of one-off actions that we might want to take. These are things like being able to navigate to certain areas on the screen. You might not think of this typically as an action that you would take, but this is the kind of fine control that you have over this, that you can say, yeah, when I click on this, I want to go to this screen. I want to close this. I want to show something else. We can do that all navigationally. Or we could interact with our data. When I click this, when I do this, I want it to automatically create a new row in my data for me. We've got interactions. We could play sounds. We could have push notifications and things like that with our communication as well, sending emails and SMS. We've got some nice AI options, and then we've got our integrations as well. Now, these actions are great for these immediate one-offs. When I press this button, I want it to fire this notification. But we also have the ability to create multi-step actions. And we're going to talk about this later in the video, where we can create some more complex logic. We could say, if this happens, then do this, and then follow it up with another action. So actions are used all throughout the application to create that functionality that we need, be it really simple things like updating records and more complex things like integrations and business logic. Next, let's talk about some of the different columns we have access to within our data. Right now, I'm looking at our contacts, and we can see that we have a number of different columns already. One of the features that I really like about Glide is that we can actually group our columns. And so if we have this particular column, we can see if we just label this with a slash, contract slash relation, here we can have this extra row across the top to be able to group that data. And this is helpful both if we're trying to show data from other tables that we're interacting with, but you could use this in other ways too. So you might have fields that are just kind of helper, that it's not really the core information. You might want to hide those, so you could just click and collapse any one of these areas. So this is really nice. It feels like we're getting a lot of the spreadsheet functionality that we don't typically get in other tools. If I'm going to add a new column, I could do so with the plus button over there. We could add a new column to the right here. And let's just talk about the different types of columns that we can choose from. So here you can see that we've got basic columns. For the most part, these are going to be columns that you're actually inputting data into, or your users are actually inputting data into. So think about things like text and numbers and checkboxes or Booleans. All that kind of information is going to live inside of these columns. Computed in other applications, if you're coming from Airtable, you would think of these as formulas. So this is the system who's making some kind of determination or calculation and then displaying that data. You're not actually inputting data into those particular columns. Then we have AI. This could be a whole video in and of itself, but there's some really cool features, things like taking audio and transcribing that to text or being able to generate new text. So it's really cool that we can do that directly within the application. And then we also have integrations here, which allow us to take external data and then pull them into the columns that we have. For this first example, let's say on one of our pages, we wanted to display information about Fraser here, but instead of just having a job title column and then displaying the company, we want it to show up as the CEO at Macro, the company that he's at. So in this case, we'd add a new column, and maybe we'll do it next to the company here, add a column. This is going to be a good use case for a template. So maybe we'll call this role, and we'll choose here. This is going to be a computed column. What's nice is that we can directly search for this. So we could search for template, and it's going to find it for us amongst all of the different column types that we have. When we select template, here's where we can enter that template text. So we're going to say title space at company. We're just going to type it like that. And now we replace that information. So we're going to say that we are going to replace the title, and that's going to be fed now by, we can choose the value for the job title. So we could search for that, select job title. And what's nice is that you can see this updating in real time. So you'll find out really quickly if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, because you can see what's showing up. So you can imagine, hey, we've got half of that part of the equation here, and now we want to add the company. So we'll replace company with the company name that we have. And this gives us what we want. So we have the CEO at Macro, we have the accountant at Human, and we can save that column. So what you'll find is that in Google Sheets and Airtable, we have more formula type language, and that allows us to do some complex things, but it can also be complex as we're doing it. Instead, Glide prefers to take the option of having a little bit more baked into their UI. So it's a little bit more click and add values to this, which can be easier to use as we're getting this set up. But for those of you who might want to do some more complex things, then you'll have to have some helpers where you're taking information and manipulating it. And then you might have another computed column after that that's then taking that data, as opposed to, oh, we're formatting this here and then we're concatenating it like we would in being able to stack those different formulas together. The next column type that's really important to talk about is our relations. And so you can see we have some of these set up already. This is that we have these contacts, these individuals who work at these companies. And so if you click on these values, what's really nice is that we can see a preview of all of that information. I love how that displays, and I think that's very thoughtful. One of the things I will say is that it's a little bit more complicated to set up these relation columns in the first place. And let me show you how this works. So if I edit an existing relation, we can see that we're doing essentially a match. We're saying that if this company, which is really just a text field, right? We can click and we can edit this text. If that text matches, we're matching the value in the companies and the company name. If we click over on companies, you can see the company name is here. So if that matches, that's when it displays that linked value, that relation that we have. So back in contacts, it's pretty easy to set up, but what's a little bit confusing is, what if you mistyped this? What if you said macro and we added an O to it? You can see that suddenly disappears because we're just really doing a match on those values to define that relationship. One of the things I'd really recommend you get in a habit of doing with Glide where possible is that we add a column to our table. And this column is going to be our row ID. And so this is a defined column that we have called row ID. And in fact, it's just going to name it for us anyways. We'll save that. And that's going to put it at the beginning. So this row ID is going to be a unique identifier for every single row, every single record that we have in our database. Now let me go ahead and do the same thing on our companies here. Now we have a unique row ID for our companies as well. So if I head back into my contacts, if I'm creating relations, most of the time I want to go off of that unique identifier because that's not going to change even if the name is going to change, the name of the company, or we mistype it or something like that. So in this case, I would add a new column here, and we'll call this the company ID. And this is just a text column that we have. And then we'll copy the value that we have from our companies table and go ahead and put that in the company ID. Now I could go through here and copy and paste all of these values. I'm not going to right now. We'll actually have a follow-up video where I'm going to give some helpful tips and tricks on how we can get started with that. But the reason that we have this here now is if I create a new relation, then here we're going to look at the company ID, and we're going to match that based on if we look at our company and the row ID. So now if there's a match, we're going directly off of that unique identifier. So we can save that. So now if in our company, we were to change the name of this to macro2, then if we go back into our contacts, you'll see that relation still works. Versus if we just relate it off of something like a name, then that gets a little bit misconfigured. And then when we actually display this in a layout for our users, we're never going to actually show this company ID. We're going to display a list of choices that they can select of the available companies. And so this isn't really something you need to worry about mistyping the unique identifier for this. This is more just setting up our data as we get started. Now, if we want information about our company to display on the contact record, that would be a great use case for a lookup. So we could add a new column. And again, this is going to be some computed data. So let's go ahead and search for our lookup. This is where we can choose the relation column that we have. So I could choose from the company relation one that already exists, or we could do this related company, which we just created. So maybe we want to display something like the logo of this company. So now we can display that logo based on the relationship with the company that we have. Let's take a look at our layout and click on one of our individual contacts that we have. And if we scroll down, we can see we have these private notes. Now remember, I'm viewing this as Hugo right now. And so I could leave a note here. Here is a note. But because this is a user-specific column, and I'm viewing this as Hugo, but let's say that I wanted to view this as Elise, she has her own ability to add private notes. And so in a lot of other applications, we'd have to have a notes table, a table just for notes, so that each person can have their own related notes. And we'd have to do a lot more complexity of setup. But now we can have all of these people each have their own notes here, and we don't have to worry about a complex setup. It just stores that information personalized for them. One of the things that can be a little bit confusing with columns is that we don't have an option for a single select or multi-select like we would have in other applications. So you'd expect to see a drop-down of values you could choose from, not just have text fields for everything. Well, we can do this in Glide, but it's a little bit of a different setup. So if we take a look at our contacts, you can see that we have these different job titles. And so right now, this is just text. It's not something that we are choosing from a list. But again, remember that this is just how the data is stored on the back end. What we care about is how we're presenting it to the user. Are they seeing it as a text field, or can we do something else? So in my layout, let's say we're editing our record of our contact. You can see right now that this is just a text field, and you can put in a value by typing that in. In our edit screen here for our contact, we can see that this is currently just a text entry field. We type in the value that we want. But instead, let's add a new component. And here we're going to search for the choice component. So this choice component, let's go ahead and drag up next to our text entry for job title. Right now, this defaulted to related company, but I'm going to choose that we're writing this to our job title. Now over here, it's yelling at me because we don't want to actually have two different fields that write to job title. This will work temporarily, and then we'll just get rid of the other one. So now I want to make sure that my values are set to job title, and we display this as job title as well. Now you'll see this is rendered on the screen as a dropdown. We can select the value that we want to display here, rather than having to type in the text itself. Now, if we have a really long list, we could certainly search for it, but if we just want to say they are a CEO, now we can click that value instead of needing to type that out. Another thing we want to do is make sure that we have the ability to limit access to who can see what in the application by limiting who has access to each row. Now, you might be tempted to open up our options here and add some visibility rules to say, hey, if the user is this, or if their role is this, then we're not going to make that visible. But that's not the most secure way of doing this. We can use visibility rules when we want to determine what we want the user experience to be, but when it comes to true security, we actually want to manage this on the back end. So if we click into our data and we take a look at our companies, in our companies, we have a client manager, and we're using this person's email address. These are the people who work at our company, and we're identifying their email address to say, okay, who is assigned to each one of these companies? And let's say we only want them to be able to see the different accounts, the different companies that they're actually assigned to. In that case, what we can do is we can make this the row owner, this email address. And now you'll see we're viewing this as Hugo. If I go into my layout, he's only going to see the companies where he's listed as that row owner. So we could go ahead and then look at different people and see what they have access to. Right now we just have a company that these individuals might have assigned to them. But this is kind of the idea behind how we're handling security in the application of who gets access to what. Now, before we publish our app, let's add our own functionality to this. Let's extend upon the app template that we already have. And we're going to do this because this is a CRM. And let's say that I have some sales reps who are logging lots of calls for the people they're contacting. We want to make this easier for them. So we're going to create an activities table. And then we also want to create an action to help them automatically log this. And we're going to use some cool AI features as well. So first, let's go into our data, and we're going to add a new table. This will be a blank table. So let's go ahead and call this activities. Now let's add all the columns that we need. First, we'll add a row ID as a unique identifier. Then we'll add contact and user IDs as text fields. Now we'll add our relations for both the contacts and the users. So we'll choose from relation, and from here, we're going to say where the contact ID that we've created is going to match in the, and careful, we've got contacts and contracts, the contacts table row ID. That's where we will have that relation. And we'll do the same thing with the relation for our users. We'll want to add a column for our date and time that we're logging this activity. We'll add a type. This will be text, but we'll want it as a choice. So either they can choose from email or SMS or phone. Now let's create a little bit of logic for our icon. So we'll call this icon, and from here we could use our if then else. And from here we could say if that type is, and we could say something like, if it matches phone, then we'll go ahead and paste our little phone emoji. And this is where we could add logic for other types as well, like email. Next, we'll create a column for audio URL. The reason we're doing it as a URL is because we have a component where we can actually record audio, and then it's going to save it, and it's just going to store the URL where it actually uploads it to, cloud storage that's just included as you're using Glide. And finally, we'll create a field called notes. And instead of this just being a text field, we're actually going to use some AI here. So let's take a look. We've got AI, and we'll use audio to text. And then we'll tell it we've got our audio URL here. So we're going to choose the audio URL that we just created in the previous field, and this is going to transcribe this automatically for us. Now, we'll presumably want to be able to see these activities and log them from the contact record. So we'll want to see the inverse relation that we just created. So let's go into our contacts. From here, we'll add a new field. We'll call this activities. And to configure our relation, we're going to look at this contacts row ID, and then we'll match across if we take a look at our activities, and we'll match that contact ID that we have there. Now, one more thing that we'll need to do on the contacts table is that we'll want to display the related activities. So we added the relation when we're on the activities to have the related contact, but because we want to display the activities in the context of that contact, then we need to add a column here. So I've got activities, and here what we're doing is we're saying, okay, now we need to match the row ID of our contact record, and we need to find that from our activities and match that with the contact ID. So this is like the inverse of what we did before. And then it's really important to make sure that we match multiple on this because we want to have multiple phone calls for a contact. We don't want to have just a single activity record. Now let's head into our layout, and we've got our collection of contacts. Let's drill into an individual contact record here because this is where we'd initiate the call and we'd want to be able to see the details of our activities. So let's scroll down here, and I think we can put this here at the bottom. Let's go into our components. We'll add a new container, and in that container, let's insert a component, and here we're going to have a new collection. We'll do this as a list. Now, if we look on the right-hand side, we've got our source, and because we've related these two tables together, the contacts and the activities, we can just click on activities rather than having to create any complex logic ourselves to say, let's display these activities. We'll add in a title for activities. I'm calling it this more generic term. You could just call it phone calls or something else if you wanted to. Now, just to make this easier to visualize, I've added a record here that links to this Adia Gazy. I keep calling her Adia. I really mean Ada, but we butchered her name. Let's go back to our layout just so that we can see a record here as we're editing our layout. So for the title of this, let's actually choose our date and time. And I'm going to remove a description for now. We'll change the image to that icon that we had the logic for so we can see the little phone here. Let's set up our edit screen for a moment. So we'll click on edit. We don't have a lot going on here. Let's add some components here. So I'm going to start with a choice. And instead of writing this to the contact, we're going to actually use the type here. This is whether it's a phone or email or SMS. We'll want to make sure to change those values as well. And the display is going to be type. So now we can choose whether this is phone, email, SMS. Let's duplicate this choice. We're going to reconfigure this. So the second choice is going to be not for type. This will be for the contact. And we can choose the image from the contact record photo just to make it look a little bit nicer as we're using this pick list. Next, let's plug in our date and time. And now rather than having the user have to type this in, they can pick from the date picker. But we're going to actually log this for them behind the scenes. But if they're manually recording it, this gives them an option as well. And then we'll next search for our audio recorder and we'll add this to the bottom. And this is going to be really easy. It just records this automatically for us. You'll see when we publish this and test it out ourselves. But rather than saving to the name here, we're going to change that to the audio URL. Okay, this looks okay for our editing screen. So let's go ahead and cancel out of this. Now here's our activity record itself when we're actually reading the record. So we should probably change what this layout looks like so it looks a little bit better here. Let's add a container and then we're going to drop our title in here and our breadcrumbs. Let's change our title to be the contact name. Let's add our fields underneath this. And so we'll want to make sure that we have our type. This is a phone call. And then let's add the date and time to display. So let's actually go back into our edit screen here for a moment. Let's just plug in a date and time for this. And let's test out our recording. You have been listening to Dan Lehman from Automation Helpers as we talk about Glide. We'll stop that, save it, and then we'll submit that. Okay, so here now we've got our date and time showing. We can add in our audio component here. Now before, when we were in the edit screen, we showed the audio recorder. If we're just looking at the record of this, then we just want to have the audio component itself to listen to it. So let's add that in. All right, so we've got our audio playing, and then let's see if we can add in our text here. And we're gonna have this text be from our field, which is our notes. So this is our transcription. So that automatically transcribes that for us. So this is now looking pretty good. Let's head back here. If we take a look, we can see we've got the date. Now this isn't a lot of information here, but remember we're in the context of the person's contact. So if we know we called them, we can see it was a call and when it was. That's really all we care about from this activities. If we want the more information, we can drill into it. I guess we could add, part of the note to start us off there. So if we look at our collection, maybe here's where we add the description and we can choose from our notes just to have a little bit more information and we can drill in if we need to. So the audio recording and the AI features are really powerful. But what if we want to automate this? We can use actions to be able to say, hey, when we initiate this phone call, we want to automatically create an activity record. So to automate this, we'll scroll up, and when someone clicks this call button, this is going to naturally open up the dialer. So let's scroll back up to the top here, and we can see we have this call button. This is where it's going to actually open up our dialer on our phone if we're using that. And so let's go ahead and change what this action actually does. So we'll click on the title component here, and you can see right here that we've got this action to dial the phone number of phone, which is fine. That's typically, we just want this really simple action. But instead we want to create our own custom actions. So instead of dial a phone number, we're going to do actions for contacts, and this is where we're going to create a new action. This opens up this configuration screen, and this is going to kick off when we click this button, but instead of just dialing the phone number, let's also go ahead and create a new record. So we're going to click on our data, and we're going to add a new row. And here we have some options. So instead of the contacts table, we're going to add a new activity. And we'll want to make sure that this links back to that contact record. So we can choose our options here, and we're going to link this to the row ID. This again is coming from the contact record because we're on that contact itself. We'll plug in that row ID. And now we'll want to make sure to log whoever is the logged in user. So the user ID in this case, we can click up here. We can choose information from the user profile. This is going to be the row ID of that user. Then for the date and time, we can just click on the current date and time when this is actually executing. Our type, of course, is going to be phone. And then with this setup, we're not actually going to record because we're just dialing this through our phone. Now we could do something much more complex, and we've done integration work before with things like RingCentral if you want to actually take the transcription from RingCentral and pass it back. In this case, we're just going to leave this alone. This is only going to tell us that a call occurred as we initiated it. It's not going to tell us the status or record this for us because we can always make edits to this after it's logged it itself. Let's make sure to change our title. So we'll call this log phone call, and we should be good to go. So now if we're back on our contact record, we can see that our button to call is hooked up to this log phone call action. And so we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and publish and share our app with our team. First, we're going to click on settings, and from here, we'll choose our privacy. We've got some different privacy settings available to us. In this case, I just want to allow myself to log into this, so I'm not going to mess around with this. But most often, you're probably looking at your users table. So the individuals that we were looking at, again, we've got that demo data right now of those 10 different people or so. They'd be able to log in, but we've got different ways to handle this. We could say if they're part of our email domain, they could log in. In this case, we're just going to say that I, myself, and the people who are actually building these apps can log in. So there's lots of different ways to handle this. This is probably a topic for another video, as well as being able to handle how the authentication process works for our users. So the most common one is that we're going to send some PIN emails. It's going to give you this unique code that you can use to log in. But there's also SSO available on Enterprise. You can sign in with Google. So we've got a few different options when it comes to authenticate. So now let's go ahead and publish our app. I'm just going to go ahead and give this a name for now. Well, let's publish this. So once we've published and logged in, remember, it's just this one application that works both on desktop and on mobile. So right now I'm seeing the full screen here. Here's my contacts, my companies that we're interacting with. Oh yeah, we added that row security so I can't actually see any companies. We've got our different users, our contracts. We can drill in and open up those contracts. So you can see it looks nice. There's a little bit more white space when we're on the large version here. And now let's flip over into mobile. Now let's take a look at this on my Android phone. We've got this installed as a progressive web app. I'll open this up. Look how nice this looks. So let's test out our functionality. We'll click on that contact. And from here, let's give her a call. So we'll press our call button. This is opening up the dialer on my phone. After I've hung up my call, then I can go back and take a look and see, hey, it actually recorded our phone call. I should change the sort order on this, so we'd want the most recent ones first. But now I could go in and edit this. We can see that it's automatically logged it. This is important because sales reps forget to log calls and everything else, but it's here. So now we could leave a quick note for ourselves. Let's test that out. The call went great. We're going to touch base next week to discuss the proposal. We'll stop. We'll go ahead and submit that recording. Now we can open up the record and we've got our transcription and the audio itself. Look how easy it was to be able to set up that kind of functionality in our own application. Now you might be wondering, how do we integrate Glide with other business applications we might be using? There's 4 main ways that we can work with integrations. So I'm in my actions right now, and you can see we have a whole category dedicated just to integrations. So there's a whole bunch of integrations that we can use out of the box without any technical knowledge whatsoever. Now, for those of you who use Make or Zapier or other automation tools to build more sophisticated integrations, there are webhooks available as well. So we could trigger a webhook based on the data that we have or some conditionality that we want to be able to push data into Make or Zapier. If you're on the business plan, there's also something called the Glide Call API. This lets us actually make our own HTTP requests from within Glide, so we don't even have to rely on another tool like Make or Zapier. We can fetch the data that we want directly. And then coming at this from the other way around, if we have an outside system and we want to push data into Glide, we can do so with the Glide API. which lets us write data directly into Glide tables. I hope this has been helpful to see how powerful Glide is, but really how easy it is to get started and how aesthetically pleasing these apps are out of the box. If you have any questions about building an application for your team, don't hesitate to reach out to our website at automationhelpers.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.